The future of work has a lot of moving parts to it. One of the topics that always rises when we talk about future of work is skills. And in this next panel discussion, we're going to talk about and explore how can leaders who are at the end of the day, coaches, move future of work trends in a direction that creates opportunity for all workers at all corners of their workforce. So this session's on skills. It's an exciting one. I'm going to be leading this action-packed panel. I'll be joined by James Webb. James is the VP of Global People Development, Engagement, and Communications at FoW Group. James brings a wealth of experience across employee relations, training, engagement, comms, is at the forefront at an organization that uses tech consistently to onboard and upskill workers. He was the former head of organizational development and learning at Zale Jewelers, and he's the former VP of organizational development and HR at Blockbuster. So James brings a tremendous amount of experience to this discussion around what we need to be doing around skills. Welcome, James. We also have Quashan Lockett. Quashan is the vice president and head of HR at Legends. Legends, if you haven't heard about them, operates some of the biggest and best venues and travel and entertainment locations across the globe, including One World Trade Center. He joined Legends in 2017 and led the people function with oversight for all HR, talent, culture, and diversity and inclusion activities. I'm super excited to have Quashan here. Also excited to be joined by Joanne Lynn. Joanne is a principal at Newark Venture Partners, brings a ton of experience from everything including investment banking, private equity, venture capital, entrepreneurship. Her most recent role was an education investor with University Ventures, where Joanne sourced, vetted, and supported seed and growth stage investment companies that are transforming the higher ed space. She's also a co-founder of a Newark-based social enterprise called Locust Labs that's aimed at expanding community access to digital manufacturing technology. She was previously an investment banking associate at JP Morgan and a Teach for America Corps member in New York City. So I'm excited about this next panel talking skills. So let's get started.
Great. So, with that, I'm excited to have everybody joining us today for this next panel on skills. The focus in this session is going to be on how leaders and what the role of leadership is in the future of work. Excited to be joined by an all-star lineup here. And to kick us off, we'll go around the horn and let everybody give their quick background of who they are and their current role. We'll start, Joanne, if you could start us off.
Sure. So my name's Joanne Lynn. I'm a principal at Newark Venture Partners. We're an early stage technology venture fund that's investing in B2B software, which includes investing in the future of work across industries. Just background-wise, and I think it's relevant, is my prior role was at a firm called University Ventures that was also investing in the transformation of higher education and this continuation of lifelong learning. So I'm very happy to be, full disclosure, an investor in One Huddle and also just part of this conversation because I think it's very important.
Great. Thanks, Joanne. Quashan with Legends.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Appreciate you inviting me to this session. I think this is fantastic. I am head of HR for Legends, also lead our D&I. Legends is a global agency in the sports and entertainment space. So we do a lot of different things, hospitality, sales, planning, attractions within the sports space. And I head up our HR team, everything from HR to diversity and inclusion, talent acquisition. We are we just moved, we have a UK office and we just moved into the Madrid, Spain space just a couple months ago.
Sure. Thanks, Q. And James Webb with FoW Group.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Thanks for the opportunity for me to be here today. So as mentioned, James Webb, I am the head of global people development, engagement, and communication for the organization. So, Fossil is a company you probably think of when you think retail stores, but we actually are a global developer and designer of watches and currently develop about 16 different brands in the marketplace.
Great. Well, let's get started. Joanne, I wanted to start with you on this topic, primarily because I feel like having a definition of future of work from somebody who has spent a lot of time evaluating and looking at technology companies and looking at potential investments, also in education. What is your definition of future of work?
Yeah, Yeah, that's a great question because it's a very broad and to some extent overused term, right? But it's a term that should constantly be redefined as well, just given the speed at which our workplaces are changing because of technology or just because of external factors. But I think in terms of future of work and from our perspective as investors, we're trying to anticipate what the fundamental changes in skills and qualities of our workforce are going to happen because of demographic changes, because of introduction of technology, because of just new industries popping up. What are the skills and qualities that our workers need to have to be successful in that future environment? Those are the types of interventions and tools that we're looking at when we think of future of work.
It's great. I'd love to bring it to, Q and James, because I think on this front, both of your businesses at Fossil Group and at Legends, you interact with so many workers at so many corners of the workforce, from frontline to full-time and leadership roles. Maybe starting with Q, what are you seeing, to Joanne's point on skills? When you look at the skills that are needed to succeed in today's workforce, is there anything that any observations you've had or gleaned?
Yeah, I think and Joanne hit it, right on the nail, really, figuring out and continuing to redefine what that looks like. And I think one of the big pieces when we talk about skills for the workforce is really, technology is a big piece of the future of work. So that doesn't mean that the workforce or that people are going completely away. So how do people interact with technology? What are the skills that they need to be able to do that efficiently? And then how do they work efficiently with other people, growing workforce, when we have all these different demographics that are now coming into the workforce, whether it be from a generational standpoint or from a ethnicity, gender. We're getting to the point where there's all different kinds of people in the workforce in different positions that may not have been there before. And it really comes down to inclusive leadership and inclusive skills of how do you successfully collaborate and work with all sorts of different people in the scope of work, and also leveraging technology to do that.
James, what do you think about, to the same point on skills? What are your thoughts on what you're saying from Fossil?
So, if you think about really, both comments, it really involves a lot of change. And so as everything changes, whether it's technology or who we work or how we work, what I'm seeing is we really need people to be more curious than ever. So I know earlier we talked a little bit about lifelong learning from Joanne's background. And I think that's just a critical skill right now is you can't stop where you are today. You have to think about what's next. How do I move forward? And how do I do things differently as an individual and a company? A couple of other things that I'm seeing a lot of lately is just agility. So with all this change, it's like, how do I have the ability to change with it? How do I operate different tomorrow than I did yesterday? And the last two things that we've seen starting to emerge and even have been highlighted by the pandemic has just been trust and empathy. So, how do you build these deep relationships where as change occurs, as these different skills come about, how can I trust the people I work with? How can I trust the people I work for? And then how can we have empathy? Because we're going to make mistakes. This is new for all of us. We're upskilling ourselves and we're dealing with things that some of us have never dealt with before. So how do I really appreciate what the other person's going through, and how do I help them through it and understand them as they move down the way, so to speak?
Sure. James, at Fossil, you all have always been, I think in the short time we've known each other, I can glean that you all have been very active in technology, consistently, and trying to think innovative and stay ahead and build infrastructure. In the last few months, a lot of companies, I think, have been hurt by not having certain infrastructure in place to be prepared for something like COVID. Have you learned anything by sort of your preparedness, and especially being in the retail category?
Yeah. So a couple of things. So one is we were fortunate enough. You think about from a business standpoint, we had invested significantly into upgrading our ability to reach out to consumers directly from a digital perspective and from an e-com perspective. And so we've seen a huge dramatic shift to that, even more so. We all knew that was coming, but the COVID has expedited that. So really where everyone was headed was the right direction. We just had to move faster. And luckily enough, we've been investing in those things heavily over the last few years to be able to really pivot there. From a learning and capability standpoint, we were already virtual, we were already digital because from an e-learning standpoint, being able to deliver virtual classes using technology such as One Huddle, because we do operate in 100 plus countries around the world. So those were things that were very important to us. So what we saw was less change for us and for our employees, and just more usage of the things that we knew were already emerging. So one thing we learned is, in these areas, as far as digital capability, is what we learned is we actually need to go even deeper, faster, and in more ways.
Sure. Joanne, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on, because James mentioned change, and I think that anything that's, especially even from my seat as a startup founder, there's been just so much change in such a short time. Has all that changed the way that you look at potential investments, or as you're looking at tech companies that are trying to tackle issues around the future of work?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's changed our perspective on how we evaluate companies, but it's changed the type of companies that we see starting up now and are looking for capital now. So there's, we started off talking about what this definition of future of work is. And if you were to describe the priorities for future of work oriented technology companies pre-COVID and which ones are popping up more and more now, I think those look very different. Whether it's, and I think part of it is the difference between sort of these hard skills, things that are very measurable. I would say pre-COVID, everyone was focused on maybe intercompany mobility, retention, recruiting, getting folks into these jobs. And now I'm seeing a lot in terms of really actually managing your existing workforce. How do we create more ties between our existing workers because we're now so remote? How do we create environments where people can be successful? So there's a little bit of that shift in where priorities in terms of investment, whether it's a company that's investing in their people or as an investor investing in startups, a shift in how we think about where our priorities should lie in terms of the future of our workforce.
Sure. Hugh, there's so much talk about skill shortages, right? So even like bringing off just the conversation so far around skills and change. We had a former senator and governor from Nebraska yesterday, Bill Carey, talk, and he made the comment around skill gaps and closing skill gaps specifically. In your seat, what do you think of when I say like close a skill gap? How do you even, how do you assess it? What are they? What are your observations right now from Legend's point of view?
Yeah, when I hear the term skill gap, it's for me, and it really is about and I think Joanne mentioned this early on, is really the continuous change and the continuous relooking at what the future of work actually is going to be. So when I look at skill gap, it's not even necessarily just about skills of today, but it's sort of anticipating what, as an employee or as a worker or even as a manager, what are the skills of tomorrow that we need to close that gap and try to get towards. And I think a lot of that has to do, again, with technology, making sure that our people understand how to leverage technology when we talk about how that's going to play into the future of work and the workforce. Automation obviously is a big piece of that. And then, really, when we talk about the time that we're in with this pandemic, right, no one sort of can anticipate the skills that were needed to kind of thrive during this period of time. And it's really a lot of, for lack of a better term, crisis management. So the ones who've been successful have been able to deal with ambiguity, deal with the crisis, if you will, but also come out on the other end better than kind of when they went in. And so it also kind of comes down to the values of the organization, right? We value ourselves at Legends and being very entrepreneurial spirit, very much about thriving through ambiguity. And I think those are the things that are not only values, but how do you take that and form and assess, okay, as an employee in a workforce, how do we prepare our employees and our workers for that type of environment, which we've inherently seen over the last 3, 4, 5 months during the pandemic, and how do we be prepared as we go forward for that?
Yeah, I mean, the theme of change and everything moving fast is real. Do you think, James, do you think that, when you think about the way that you use possible technology to impact retail workers, or you think about, coaching and development programs, like what are so many companies, missing, in your opinion, when it comes to having a well-rounded strategy to upskill people, reskill people, and move? If you mentioned earlier agility and moving fast, like what have you found?
So I think from a miss standpoint, and what makes it very complex is, it would be easy if it was one group that was changing, right? And so, or a certain, set of skills where you could say, okay, we just got to go knock these 4 out. But because this is, and why there's some areas that are obviously being more impacted than others, say maybe, needing more analytics or more digital capability as we kind of get into this new way of working. It's really impacting, every department, every group, every person. And so, where I find the biggest area of opportunity is just how do you take on something that massive and at scale for an entire workforce, right? And how do you prioritize that and move the entire business forward on not 4 or 5 skills, but 4 or 5 skills for 15 or 20 different groups that function differently and work differently, right? So to me, that's a big opportunity that's in front of all of us. Is just how do you tackle something that's so enormous, and then how do you prioritize it along the way?
It's always interested me that there's this sort of in between space between academia and education, and the responsibility of education to sort of sell a degree that properly prepares people for jobs today. And then on the other side, you have folks like you all, Q and James, on the corporate side that have to figure out how you get a new hire, skill them up appropriately, and then continue their career pathing forward. Joanne, you've been on both sides, right? You look at a lot of education companies, a lot of ed tech companies, especially with University Ventures, and now you're also, you do a lot also on the on companies that are tackling future work. Like, where do you see responsibility? Like, how are we doing between both of those groups? Or are they sort of like the right and the left that don't talk to each other?
There's definitely a huge gap in terms of theory and practice, right? And maybe, Sam, this is a stat that you're familiar with, but I think there was a study that was done that was saying that like 80% of those top level senior HR talent executives believe that coaching and development is a key leadership practice, but then they only think that 15% of managers in their organizations are actually good at it, right? And so if you're trying to James' point, an entire workforce at the junior or even entry level or mid management level are struggling and trying to manage their careers, just manage their pathways through one organization or multiple organizations. They need resources to be able to do that. And I don't think a lot of those resources are taken advantage of. And I think where the bottleneck is, and it's not necessarily that middle management isn't maybe prepared or skilled for it, but just in terms of how you think about the pyramid of a workforce, they are in a sense a bottleneck because a lot of that responsibility falls on them. So what are the tools and resources that we can make available to that part of our workforce to really empower everybody? I think that's what's missing and what's very difficult to manage from a senior executive perspective.
Hey, Sam, do you mind if I piggyback on that just a second?
Sure.
To Joanne's point, if you take everything she says And then you add the on top of it, the complexities of in what tools do you use, right? So most of those executives are also used to using a very traditional set of tools that have worked for the last 20 years, but that may not be the best set of tools for the way I learn today coming into the workforce for the first time. So, traditionally me going to set in a class to close those skill gaps is not the way I want to be. It's not the way I want to interact. It's not the way I want to shop. It's not the way I live. And so I think the other challenge is how do we ensure that the technology actually, catches up, changes, and shifts to accommodate this new workforce that's coming in or these new skill sets that you need. And I think that's another huge complexity that adds to this, situation.
I would also add, James and Joanne, a big part of this is also, and there are studies that show that a big success of learning happens on the job, right? So we have to find a way that where we're not just trying to get people upskilled and trained before they move into whatever that role is how do we do that while they're already in there? And obviously that has inherent challenges because you have a day job to do, but we're also trying to learn as you go. So we've got to figure out a way to phase that in to where you're learning, but also being able to be productive and effective and perform highly at the job that you're doing.
Totally. The other thought right now, especially with the speed at which work is changing, right? I think we all agree that, I think maybe James made the comment earlier, things are being accelerated, especially in this moment. Some future of work trends that maybe we thought were farther away are being bumped up a little bit. I'd be interested to anybody's thought on this next question. As work changes, quicker, and as companies are trying to keep up with the way jobs are changing, there's this perspective that I don't want to say robots are going to take everybody's job, but we've all heard read enough articles and see enough stuff about that. But I think that there's validity that automation is going to impact certain frontline roles with a different level of velocity than it's going to impact other roles. But as frontline labor gets automated, potentially, you're going to have to move people into some leadership or coaching roles quicker. What are your, I guess, opening it up, thoughts on that as a possibility, or how you're preparing for it, or how you're thinking about it?
From my perspective, I do think there's a lot of things that you can automate and that you can do. I mean, I was thinking about it the other day, when you look at the industry that supplies all of our, basically the food chain, and, you read about all of them having to deal with being hit by the pandemic very hard. You immediately go to, gosh, if you could have automated that whole process and not had to, really exposed all those people to that, how much better would it have been for them, for all of us, et cetera. And so you start to see, you start to see that evolution occurring, and during a pandemic, you even start to ask yourselves, how can you do even more of that so you take people out of being, put in harm's way, so to speak. However, where I currently see things coming about is why that's all possible. It's just such a significant investment too. So I do believe why we're going to see some shifts in that direction. I know for us especially, it's just something that's not going to be immediate just because of the cost involved, the change that has to occur to actually make that happen. It just doesn't make it, it's a hard investment to sell, so to speak, of what you need to do to be successful at really moving in that direction.
I'll jump in from my industry. So I'm in the sports business, and a portion of our business is hospitality, so food and beverage in the sports environment. And so there's all sorts of conversations out there where people will say, well, your concession workers or your food and beverage frontline staff, that can be automated. And so when I think of, okay, what does that look like for our workforce and what changes, I think there's just a greater emphasis on the customer experience and the fan engagement, right? So that tactical work can be done through automation. I think there's still obviously a big emphasis on the fan and on the customer. So do those, what are the skills that those employees and those workers need to continue to drive the engagement piece? beyond the transactional piece. And that's where my mind would shift to that.
Yeah. What you started off the panel with, Sam, was you were talking about how amid this great technological change, a lot of times we forget about the group of folks that are the basis of future of work, which are the workers, right? And this human element is never going to be fully automated. So what are the skill sets that we can train that frontline workforce in order to help them be more effective? To Q's point about customer experience, those true human qualities that will further enhance the company's goals, right? Whether it's in the sports and entertainment space or the retail space. I don't think that component is ever going to go away. So shifting more towards maybe soft skills than those hard technical skills is where I think a lot of the focus is going to go.
Yeah, look at where we are with the pandemic. I mean, there's still a people element, and you said the humanizing. I mean, people are yearning that human connection, right? Just being not able to go out, not able to interact, like that is never going to go away. So if you can shift to the skills that really hit on the humanized piece and the people piece of whatever business that you're in, that's where I think the skills will evolve to talk about automation.
Sure. James, have you done, I guess, during the COVID time, as you operate remote, you still try to keep people work ready and connected and together? Like, I think like the definition of training is maybe shifted a little bit, because there's maybe not certain things you can train on as well when you're in a pause. Have you learned anything in this, the last few months about what the impact of training can be, or any strategies that have worked for you guys if possible?
Yeah, so some of that's through what we've done, and some of that I've learned has just been amazing. It's just the agility of us, just as an overall culture, and just from a people standpoint. I've been so impressed. While we have the technology and things in place to help enable it, I've been so impressed with how our employees have been able to transition so successfully to, being in an office 100% of the time, 5 days a week, to working remotely and still doing an amazing job. So it's been something I've been extremely impressed with. And even sometimes, as I've gone out to other places to maybe get some to-go order, or, driven by and seen a restaurant, how they've been automatically able to, convert something to still do business. It's just been very impressed overall with just our ability as a society to adapt during something so severe. So with that, one of the things that we've learned, a lot of is why there always has been this notion of, you can't train certain things outside of a classroom. I think the way we're looking at it now is, you can't train certain things when you're not in person, but it doesn't have to be in a classroom. And so we're finding, our virtual experiences to be just as effective and just as engaging as it was when we were sitting down, stairs all together in a room. Why it may not create the full connection that the other colleagues mentioned, today, it is creating somewhat of a connection, and more importantly, it is still giving people the skills they need to be successful. And we're even starting to look at how do we take that concept and how do we move it to more individual experiences to follow up, which in the past we didn't always do, which to me is the most important thing, is how do you make that training stick? And so now how are we doing these individual virtual coaching sessions to make that happen? And people are actually feeling a little bit more comfortable with that, because now it's just starting to be part of how they operate daily, is virtually.
Sure, totally. I appreciate everybody's time on this panel. I have one final question we've been asking everybody, and I'd like to go again around the horn with your response to it. And it's been super eye-opening for me to hear perspectives from, like we mentioned earlier, whether it's people in community leadership, nonprofits, technology, investment, C-level leaders, talent leaders, diversity leaders. My question is, and maybe Joanne, you can start, what is your hope for the future of work?
I think to reiterate one of the points that it's been discussed throughout, right? My hope is that while we continue to invest in technology, that we don't lose that the humanizing factors to a workforce. I think to some extent we've seen that shift as the pandemic has really forced us to reevaluate what skills and abilities are crucial to maintaining a strong workforce. I want that to continue. So not really losing that human side of it, even though technology will continue to be a big part of the future of work.
Great. Thank you. James, how about you? What do you think? What's your hope for the future of work?
So, similar to Joanne is that we don't forget the customer in all this. So, it was mentioned earlier that, in hospitality, what do they want and how does that experience become even more important? So, as work changes, as, automation comes in, that we still keep that consumer in mind and what they really want and what they really need. And in addition to that, that we don't forget that there is an employee experience and it is a differentiator, and that we don't stop making sure that it's the best it can be, to really be able to support the business and support the people that we serve on a daily basis.
Great. Q, you get the last word.
Yeah, for me, 2 words: inclusive leadership. And it's something that I'm super passionate about, something that I truly believe in. And what I mean by that is, as we think of the future of work and the evolution, we have to have diverse representation and perspectives. Technology, automation, those things don't just happen, right? Somebody's coming up with the framework and building those out. Have to have diverse set of mindsets and thoughts and perspectives and genders and generations at the table, coming up with what that looks like. And then similar to what Joanne and James said, is having that inclusive leadership piece of making sure that all perspectives are being thought of as we come up with the solution, whatever the skills are, whatever the framework is, whatever the path forward is. Having that diversity and that inclusiveness and building that out will only serve for the greater good of making sure everybody's represented and what this looks like in the future.
Well, this was a great. I got all types of notes, everybody. So this has been awesome. I really appreciate your participation and sharing. Joanne, James, Q, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for organizing, Sam.
Take care.
Cool.